You said camps.
So safari camps. So they used to be like round huts with thatched roofs. And then you gather together with a view over the Luangwa River, for example.
Am I like fenced, or is it just like animals coming and wandering around through camp?
Not fenced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we would be in a tent, and we would hear the elephants going through camp. And you would think to yourself, like, how do the elephants know not to tread on us? Yeah.
I've got some bad news. Ingeborg, that didn't. You guys just got lucky.
It was very scary.
G'day and welcome to Global Horizons. I'm your host, Rob Malicki, coming to you today from Wurundjeri country in Melbourne. We're on the lands of the Kulin Nation. It's such a great privilege to be here. And my guest today is somebody I've been dying to sit down with for so long, Ingeborg Loon. Thanks for joining me on Global Horizons.
Thank you, Rob. It's so nice to hear that, actually, and such a surprise. And thank you for inviting me.
You know, back when I was working at Macquarie in the early 2000s, we had this amazing leader there called Tony Adams. And those people listening along who knew Tony would absolutely emphasise what a giant of the field he was. But Tony would always talk about this Ingeborg. And then I think I didn't actually meet you in person for maybe like 8 years. And it was so wonderful because like there's this amazing human I've heard so much about. And then there you are and you're so wonderful and approachable. And you've got an interesting story. I mean, you've studied in a number of different countries around the world, some of which were quite unusual.
Yes. Unwittingly.
Unwittingly?
Yes. Maybe we start at the beginning and...
Let's do that.
So I was born in the Netherlands. I'll probably be saying Holland. And then before I was 1 year old, my father got stationed overseas for the work he was doing. So we moved to Bahrain. Now, I can't say I studied there because I was too young. A few years later, we moved to Liberia, where my father was stationed then. And I started like kindergarten and so there. So even though I spoke Dutch at home, English was my language of communication outside the home. And I think more and more English came into the home as well. Then we moved to Zambia, and we lived there for about 5 years. My sister was born there, ex-British colony. Yesterday, I think they celebrated 60 years of independence, so it was quite fresh out of colonization back then. And so very British standards, accents. So I got that like British international school upbringing, still have friends from there. We're planning a reunion back there soon. So that was a fantastic experience. Those are basically my primary school years. And then we moved back to Holland for a while. My father had to go to headquarters, and we all had such reverse culture shock.
Wow, yeah.
No shade on the Netherlands, but it was just, we were a certain way, and my parents had always wanted to live overseas. And we, about a year later or so, I remember coming home from school, and my mother had just been speaking with my father, and she said, how would you like to go and live in another country? I said, yes. Not even knowing what country that was going to be. She goes, it looks like we're going to Seoul, South Korea. I said, okay, that's around like Russia, China, Japan, around there. We hadn't been to that part of the world yet. And I said, yep, sounds good, wonderful. So after the International School of Lusaka, where I think I'd finished 5th grade, we went to the Netherlands. I went to a Dutch school, and they said, you've never been taught. You've never learned in Dutch. We better put you in 5th grade again. So I did that again. That was interesting. When we moved to Seoul, and we decided that I'd go to Seoul Foreign School, and Korea, especially back then, had a very strong American influence. That's where my accent still is from. Try as I might to get an Aussie accent. Yes, and I think I was about 12, so I was halfway through grade 6 in the Netherlands, and we went to Seoul, and the school said, well, you're 12, you need to be in 7th grade. So then I skipped the grade, and I had to go from Dutch into English again, but not just English, American. I mean, that was just really, that took quite a bit of adjusting as well.
So you're like a chameleon. You basically can just like... merge into any environment.
Maybe I do, but it wasn't always easy, but it was still enjoyable. And even at the time, I realized that it was quite different and unusual and interesting.
I have so many questions. A simple one just to begin with. What did your dad actually do that took you around?
He worked for the KLM Dutch Airlines.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And at the time, they would have people stationed in different countries or regional head offices, and that's what he would manage. So yes, travel, I guess, has been a part of my upbringing since, before I was 1.
Yeah, you're hardwired pretty much. So it's interesting, like those first sort of 3 places that you mentioned, Bahrain, Liberia, and Zambia. I have no mental picture of any of those. Maybe just kind of running through them. What's your memory? Let's start with Bahrain, because that was do you have a visual, or were you too young?
I was really too young when we left. I was about 3. I've seen, movie videos. I've seen, photos, and I hear the stories. So I can, it was very sandy, very undeveloped. It was all about oil. Maybe I'll give my age away, but this was the late 60s. So very different. I've gone back for, on work trips to Bahrain, and I've tried to look for where I thought we were living in the club, like the swimming club, and so that we used to go to. Not there anymore. So, Liberia, I do remember. And it was, from my perspective, very interesting, a little bit scary. I saw a lady, my mother was walking with, the 3 of us were walking to my father's office. She got mugged. Our bag got stolen on the way, and it was always like you're always looking around you. And, we had security guards and lots of burglaries. Yeah, so that was, but also very interesting. And then it's right on, the ocean, very wild ocean that we used to go swimming in. No lifeguards. My parents are like, how did we ever do that? So, but very interesting.
And then Zambia?
Yeah, wonderful place, wonderful memories. I was older as well, so I was able to really assimilate those memories. And
paint me a picture for those people listening along who may not have been there, or like me, don't have that kind of mental image. What does it look like? What's it sound like? The smells, the food?
Australia.
Really?
I think Zambia is a major reason why I've ended up in Australia.
Is that right?
The climate, very similar. The landscape, the red dirt, the eucalypts, the jacarandas, many of the same birds. And through the climate, the lifestyle. So barbecues, outdoors, swimming. So when I came to Australia down the track, I thought, this is like Zambia. I can't see myself going back to Zambia at this stage, but this is where I want to live. And that's really, very similar. But you've got the safaris, the national game parks that you don't have here, which were very special. And even on one school trip, we took a plane to Luangwa Valley National Park, and I mean, those are just such fond memories for a very young kid to have had to go with them to school on safari.
What's special about that particular national park?
Oh, the diversity of the animals. The camps are good. They're these days, I think they cater to a large part to the elite.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just going in a forward drive, early morning, late afternoon drives, safari drives, seeing all the different animals, and just being with your friends and away from parents and so on, getting on a plane to get there. Very, very different, just core memories, but very, like dry. There's a dry and a wet season, but just kind of wild, not such a large population, quite a wild.
You said camps.
So safari camps. So they used to be like round huts with thatched roofs. And then you gather together with a view over the Luangwa River, for example.
Am I like fenced, or is it just like animals coming and wandering around through camp?
Not fenced.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And we would be in a tent, and we would hear the elephants going through camp. And you would think to yourself, like, how do the elephants know not to tread on us?
I've got some bad news. Ingeborg, that didn't. You guys just got lucky.
That's very scary. Yeah, lots of scary things.
Oh, incredible. Okay, so somehow you've ended up like basically seeing like that half of the world, and you ended up over in the sort of Asia Pacific side of the world. So South Korea is where we kind of last saw you. What was then the trajectory to get you from there down to here?
About 5 years. Most of my high school was done at Seoul Foreign School in Seoul, and then my parents got moved again back to headquarters. They said, we're going to move you somewhere else. Once in a while, you'd need to come back. Knowing that there'd be that move, not knowing if there'd be a school for me. I intended to do the International Baccalaureate. And I'd grown up in Zambia reading the good old English in Blyton books. So I thought boarding school would be a fantastic idea. It wasn't.
Oh, gosh.
So after 1 year, so I was in the Netherlands. My parents got moved to Helsinki, Finland, with my sister. So I was in Holland going to boarding school, and did not really enjoy it. Learned to study, that's for sure. And I had some fantastic teachers, and I really got into it. But the second year of that program, I did at another school. I moved schools. And I chose to live as far away. Like, I had a list of like homestay families, and I picked one. I was like, oh yeah, that one, because I actually knew the town, and it's very, very nice. And so I said, I'll live there, and it's as far as away as possible from school. And then I cycled, 13 kilometers each day.
Yeah, wow.
Each way each day to get to school and home again. And I really loved that. And there was quite a severe winter that year. I just kept on cycling, and I was so happy that I wasn't doing school and living in the same place anymore.
Do you think that experience taught you something that stayed with you? Because that's a big commitment. I remember like commuting to work that was about that kind of distance. And when you're doing that day in, day out, like, yeah, you like build, I mean, obviously you build muscle and fitness and things like that too, but it's also just the necessity of it. You get to the end of the day, rain, hail, shine, snow, dark, cold, you're getting back to that bike and you're riding home.
I found it liberating. Sometimes I'd be on the bike path and it would be raining, so more people would be on the bus, and I'd look across at the bus lane and, those fogged up buses and full of people. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm not in there. And I think I'm quite a nature, open air, loving type of person anyway. So that might have ingrained something in me, but it was a good experience. And in Holland, the bike paths are there, they're everywhere, safe to cycle. But I did have friends who had those little mopeds. A lot of Dutch kids, 15, 16, 17, have the mopeds. So I'd, hold on to them sometimes and get dragged to school.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's cool. Nothing ever went wrong?
No, it didn't happen often.
Okay.
That was a cheat's way.
Yeah, interesting. Just as you were talking, and I was thinking about my cycle commuting days, and then it kind of occurred to me that what I took away from that kind of experience of just necessity of having to do it was it doesn't bother me if I'm out and about somewhere and it starts to rain, because it's in transient, it'll pass. In transient? Sorry.
Transient.
It's transient, thank you. It's transient. It will pass. And so you can sort of suffer that discomfort knowing that at some point in the not too distant future, you're going to be warm and snug at home, having a warm shower, getting into a new fresh pair of clothes. I kind of wonder if sometimes that has carried through into like stressful situations, and sort of knowing that, this is so bad right now, I'm so stressed, but it's also going to pass.
That things will pass. That's true. And I think it builds up a bit of like resistance and the persistence. Just persist, keep going. Make it as good as possible. Make the best of it.
Where did you first land in Australia? Where and when?
In a place called Gunning, which is between Goulburn and Yassos, north of Canberra. Yeah, along the Hume Highway. Yeah.
That's a long way from Holland.
Long way from Holland. I can tell you how that came about. When I was living with this family, right, when I was doing all the cycling in my last year of high school, they said, there's a family next door, across the way. They've got 3 daughters. One is your age, and their surname is this. I was like, oh my God, I know no one in Holland, but I know this family through a friend of mine, still a friend of mine today, who I met in Zambia, got to know. Helene Jonker, still really good friends. They moved to Mozambique, then to Austria, then to the Netherlands. And I'd followed them. I'd visit them in all these places. When they were back in the Netherlands, one summer I was visiting them, staying with them, and they said, Helene said, my friend, is having her grandfather's 80th birthday on a boat. Come along. That was that family. So I knew the family, and I'd heard about this friend. I ended up living next to that family. But the girl, my age, was overseas in Australia. So after high school, she decided to go to Australia to perfect her English or Australian. And she had a job in a place and she was jillarooing. It was a bed and breakfast with horses. I thought, Australia, I haven't been there before. That sounds excellent. That's what I'm going to do after school. So I wrote to her, I got a place. And that's where I ended up going. From Helsinki, long way to Canberra. got picked up. Another coincidence, one of my mother's best school friends from the Netherlands had ended up living in Yass. So she came and picked me up, took me there, and for $80 a week, which I'm sure wasn't even legal, and lodging in the battered shearers' quarters. I was there for a while, so a few weeks, and it was cold. I knew it would be cold in July, but it was like the pipes froze.
Yeah, wow.
And so there was another person. So the managers one day said, "Oh, Ingeborg, you'll be so happy to hear this. This weekend, there's a new person coming to work here, and she's also Dutch." And I rolled my eyes. I was like, very undiplomatically. I said, I didn't come all the way to Australia to meet more Dutch people. Anyway, we're best of friends. And every weekend we'd be poring over the newspaper in front of the crackling fire after we'd done all our work and look at like all these islands in the north of Queensland where we could maybe go and work. We didn't care if we were going to be dish hands or tilers or anything. Dunk Island, Green Island, Lizard Island. Oh, so
You're like, just get me the out of the cold central southern highlands.
although I loved the scenery, and so it was really, really interesting and very nice. We ended up in Sydney, we went to the Greyhound bus station, put our money in front of the guy. We said, "How far north will this take us?" We had very little money.
Wow.
And he said, he says, what a good place is these days, it's up and coming, is Airlie Beach. And with some, like Hamilton Island, they've just built it. Keith Williams has just fixed it all up. And we thought, that sounds good. So 36 hours later, we got off and, got jobs on Hamilton Island.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay, so let's just keep going because this is great. It was such a rollicking adventure. What's it like then living on a tropical island to work?
It was fantastic. We saw, the salaries again were not great, but the camaraderie amongst the late teens, early 20s people who were working there. And we're getting paid to be on this island where people come and, spend money. We didn't have the same rights as all the guests, of course, but it was still fantastic.
I'm just thinking as you're telling this story about like how small the world is, right? Like the people from Africa who suddenly reappear in Australia, all these kind of people. It's almost like no accident that you ended up in international education because we know how small the world is once you're working in this field, right?
Yep. So once I was in Australia, I thought this is the place for me. And we hear that from so many people, right? After a while, I had a spot at university in the UK and in the Netherlands. This was supposed to be a short stint in Australia. And I called my parents up and I said, "Oh, look, I don't really want to do anything else but stay here. And if I really have to go to university, can I, I'll do it here in Australia." And they said, "Are you crazy? Do you know how expensive that is for an international student? Why don't you come back to Europe, take your place at university in the Netherlands where it's very good quality, doesn't cost us anything, and then you could do anything you want." I said, well, I couldn't actually argue with that. But this was the days before the Bologna Agreement, so you actually really had to do like 5 years of study to get a master's degree. But there was one bachelor's degree, and that was Bachelor of Japanese and Economics. I said, oh, that sounds good. Short degree, get me back to Australia. Through my Hamilton Island and other experiences at the time, I knew that being able to speak Japanese was an asset, was a good thing, would help me migrate to Australia. So that's actually what I did.
Interesting. And where did you do that then?
At Erasmus University in Rotterdam.
So flew back. Yeah. It's quite. Sorry, I was just thinking about how funny that is. Your parents who relocated you all around the world in these exotic places, then being surprised that you're like, I want to stay in Australia.
Well, it was for the first time I could actually choose what I would. I did. It wasn't conscious at the time, but that's how it ended up. It's like, hey, my turn to choose, and I choose Australia. So I did end up back in Australia, and through a connection, I was in Brisbane, and that's really been there ever since. And so it was a little bit difficult to get a job. But this was during the recession we had to have, actually.
Oh, the 80s, yeah.
Yeah, early 90s.
And
early 90s. I got a job, but I wanted something different, and I was finding that no employers would really recognize my degree from the Netherlands. So I thought, you know what, recession we have to have. I'll go back to study, and I'll get a local degree, and then that should help, which it did. Someone said to me, well, you should get credit for your first degree. So I went to this university And long story short, they didn't recognize, they said, oh, we don't know what university this is. We can't give you credit. So I wrote back to my university, old university, saying, can you, send through the papers? Then they said, oh, yes, okay. So there was no internet, there was no newser, nothing like that. One person hadn't heard of this university, so they said, we can't, verify this and give you credit. But then I did study there in Brisbane, and then it went from there. And towards the end of my studies, so I continued with the Japanese studies and international relations and so. And I was badgering the head of the Japanese department saying, do you know any Japanese people in Brisbane? I want to apply for a job, use my Japanese skills and so. And she said, oh, I know Mr. Kitamura. He runs Brisbane International Language College. I said, yep, sounds fine. We met. And I got a job there, and that was my first entree into international education, because mostly Japanese students would come and study English. And here I was receiving their applications in the mail, writing out offer letter in triplicate, and running to the Medibank private office for the OSHC and things like that.
Yeah, I remember that sort of period because Japanese language skills was a really big focus. There was a big push around that then, and trying to build the economic connections between Australia and Japan. So the timeliness of that was awesome.
It was. And it was handy at that time.
Yeah.
But that's kind of, faded as I've done different things and it wasn't so reliant or connected to a particular country or so. But what I always wanted to do when I had, Australia and living here in my mind still, I thought I want to do something that I want to export something Australian. I want to have a connection between Australia and the rest of the world when I'm here. All I knew at the time was Austrade. I thought, I want to work for Austrade. That's what I want to trade. I want to export. But it ended up being education, which is, great.
Isn't that incredible? You haven't been tempted to go and try and set up business exporting Vegemite or something silly? I don't know.
I'm sure there are others that do that already much better than I ever would. It's been a really, good trajectory.
So maybe just you can rattle them off, some of the places that you've worked since you've been in international education. So when Tony was talking about you back in the early to mid 2000s, what were you doing then?
Probably working at either TAFE Queensland International and then after that I moved to the University of Queensland.
Must have been UQ.
Might have been UQ.
Yeah,
those days. Yeah, like marketing, recruitment.
Yeah.
All of that, the early days, and then went to Griffith University for quite a while. And then I thought, I've been in Brisbane for a while, time to look for something different. And I was looking even at opportunities overseas at the time. And then the ACPET at the time, job came up in Canberra. My husband and I and our two little kids at the time happily moved to Canberra, had a really good experience there. Then moved to Sydney for about 4.5 years, worked for Academies Australasia, which was wonderful. Then for family reasons, my parents were getting elderly, and so we moved back to Brisbane, which we hadn't really planned. But so there's been a lot of moving around, but happy to be staying put for a while.
The problem with doing a podcast is as we're having this conversation, you open up all these doors and I have to choose one to kind of walk through. So I'm really struggling here, but something that hasn't come up on the podcast so far is some of the stories from those early days of recruiting. So, it's 20 years ago. It's still relatively recent, but in terms of international student recruitment to Australia, it really started in the 90s after the Dawkins reforms in the late 80s. But it really is that kind of late 90s period where things really sort of got seriously started. So what was it like when you sort of walked into that part of the industry? I guess it would have been a lot more unstructured compared to now.
Yes, it was. So I joined, let's say, TAFE Queensland International in 1995, and I think it was just starting there. Like my boss at the time, Cam McConnell, he had just, I think, been to Latin America or appointed some agents there. So, the Brazilian and the Colombian students were just starting then. When I went to UQ, we really tried to support, Richard Byron, LAE, who had just moved from the Gold Coast to Cali, Colombia. So those really early days of recruiting, and there was a lot of demand. Yeah, lots of road shows that started building up. But some of the agents that are around these days started around that time.
Yeah. And some people won't even really remember, even just the travel logistics was a whole different kettle of fish, wasn't it? Because it wasn't like, the internet was around and you could price check all of these different flights and it was easy to, work out what options you're going to go to. As you sort of said earlier, a lot of the stuff was paper-based and you had to write letters off or send faxes just to get stuff organised.
There was an IEAA recruitment and marketing forum, I think it was last year, where Brendan Lutwich, so we were colleagues at UQ, talked about the days when we would go on a roadshow and you'd take an extra suitcase to put the applications in and bring them back.
Wow.
Yep. And we'd all kind of compete with each other, like who had the biggest, the fullest, the heaviest suitcase of applications.
That is so cool.
That's why I work for StudyLink now.
I love it. Oh my God. And that's like actually a high stakes. That's the suitcase you do not want going missing on the plane.
That's right.
Did you ever hear a story about somebody losing a suitcase full of applications?
No, not
that.
that
Happened?
Might have happened. I didn't hear about it, but we were...
Nobody's admitting that.
On a similar note, we were putting up banners the other day and they're like, oh, so light and we've got so many and all that. And I said, I remember the day. So, where banners were so expensive and so difficult to, produce and heavy to take with you. And there was once a story in India, Rachel Colasso, we'd put our banner, this was for UQ, we'd put our banner in the hotel storage. And we checked out and we left to the airport. We're like, the banner. And we had to go back. Of course, we felt we had to go back, get the banner, at the risk of maybe being too late for the flight because we did not dare to go back without the banner. So, I mean, things have changed a lot.
And it's funny, we do kind of forget, when we think about technology, we sort of think about digital technology and how that whole world, that's completely changed. Everything was done on paper before, now look where we are. But technology was everything, right? It's like, the material is used in the banner, the printing process that has reduced the cost from $1,000, 15, 20 years ago down to a couple of $100 today, which is like an order of magnitude cheaper than it was. So it's kind of everything, isn't it? Yeah, across the board. When did you go to StudyLink?
About 7.5 years ago.
It's been that long, wow.
When I was still living in Sydney.
Perfect.
But actually the connection with StudyLink started way earlier. About, I'd say, at least 15 years ago when I was at Griffith University. My boss at the time said, you've got to, not just to me, but to our team, you've got to meet this person. He's here, he's selling this product that is it's going to revolutionize things. It was a course directory, you could advertise on it, and there were rumblings of, admissions management at the time or so. So we were introduced to Roger Bendel, who's, one of the pioneers, really, of the sector and a really fantastic connector of people and ideas. And he was representing StudyLink ahead of Jason Howard. And we signed up StudyLink at the time, and I think for the beginnings of the product that it has become now. So I've always known about it, kept up with its trajectory, how it's doing. Yeah. And I've always really promoted it, even when I wasn't working for StudyLink. And then when I got the chance to join the organization, I thought this is one hell of a product to work with and represent and stay in the industry, but really as, someone who's got that holistic view across different providers and sectors and those that I'd worked in.
Jason Howard's been on the podcast a couple of times, and he's very generous with the stories that he tells. But what I've loved about that story, and just absolute clarity for anyone listening, not any kind of promotion, there's no affiliate or anything like that, but I just love the story about how that product and that company has developed. And just because it's such a great case study, I think, in how to build a good product and how to do it incrementally, not rushing into things, really thinking about customers and the service and everything like that, and just building it out over time. I think just feel in the modern world like we're in such a rush to create something, a unicorn company in 6 months. And other than that 0.001% of companies, that almost doesn't exist. And then you've got, the real ones that are built over a long time and they last a long time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, he probably went through the trajectory, but it's always been about the provision of information to make the right decisions for study abroad, for mobility.
Left-hand turn. Somebody that kind of grew up doing a lot of travel, living all over the world and everything, and now you've kind of sort of found your place, right, in Australia, but I imagine you've continued to travel throughout. Where's been the most interesting place, or the place that's kind of captured your imagination in, let's say, like the last 20 years?
Ooh, nice to think about that. There are a few. Libya comes to mind.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we were part of that Austrade, I think the first Austrade foray into recruiting, in Libya and different countries in the Middle East. North
Gaddafi was
Africa.
still alive?
Just after.
Just after.
Yeah, so Libya, even Oman. So I think Latin America, like the first time or two that I went to, say, Colombia, I thought Mexico just blew me away. Like in Australia at the time, we were talking about, internet here, maybe yes. Do we make it available to students? There, you go, to the private universities. They've got Wi-Fi enabled, whole campuses. You can go anywhere. And this was a long time ago again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really quite interesting.
It is funny, isn't it, when you think about other places in the world where back in 2013 when we were debating about creating a national broadband network, that the country even needed to pause and think about it. And yet we've been out-hustled by so many places around the world that obviously saw the future coming well before we did. We were having stupid arguments about what in long-term amounts of money is just peanuts.
Yeah, and I found that quite humbling, actually, that of seeing how other countries are so much more advanced and I didn't even know about it. And I felt a bit embarrassed personally, like how, we need to be careful that we don't, not we as Australians or anybody as an individual, find out a bit more before we make judgments or assumptions.
Is there something that you yearn for from Holland? I mean, I know you lived in many places growing up, but is there something that you just kind of like, Gouda cheese, or I don't know.
Oh, yeah, definitely that.
Yeah.
The older the better, which is harder to get here.
Yeah.
I think, there's a word in Dutch, and they say that there's no translation for it. I think maybe Swedish Norwegian might have it, or Hugo or so, but coziness, like if you're having a good chat with someone, that's nice. A party can be gezellig. Gezellig. Good accent. Just having a good time. Yeah, nice. Whether it's with friends, colleagues, family, indoors, outdoors. It's like a description of the atmosphere. And I'm not saying you can't get that atmosphere anywhere else, but having lived in Holland a total of maybe 5 years, one here and then the uni. And so then maybe as I'm getting older, I realize, I probably am quite Dutch still, intrinsically or in my DNA in many ways. So when I'm there, it's like, this all feels quite natural.
That's fascinating because, and that's the influence of family, isn't it? Because your parents were Dutch. Did they also travel when they were young? Or?
Yes, they as soon as they could. They've always, wanted to live abroad. And my mother was working for NATO in Paris when my parents met. And my father, wanted to work for an airline. He started as a purser, as a flight attendant. They always wanted to travel. And I think I've lived in the Netherlands a bit more than they have. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's incredible. This is where culture becomes fascinating, isn't it? Because it's not just the culture of the places that we live in that colour our lives, but it's also the culture of the families we grow up in and those circumstances as well. So, even though 5 years in the Netherlands, but it's there somewhere, right? This piece.
Yeah, and I have quite a large family, like lots of relatives, lots of cousins, and so you kind of go back into that bosom of that background.
Sorry, I'm just thinking my wife's French, so there's this thing about Australia with the French people. They're just like, Australia is like the dream. Is there something like that with Dutch? Like, is there a connection between Australia and Holland, or is it not so much? Or do the family kind of make that connection and think that it's incredible, or do they think it's a little bit weird that you're on the other side of the world?
Well, they followed me to Australia. So my dad took early retirement as soon as my sister had finished her high school. And then they moved to Brisbane because I was there, and they were also like, we're free, not necessarily wanting to stay or go back to the Netherlands. So,
That's all. And where's your sister then?
In Brisbane.
She's in Brisbane too?
Yeah, she's in Brisbane too.
I love it.
I know.
What a great story. I sort of started this interview by talking about Tony Adams, one of the sort of great leaders that's been in the industry. But who else over the last 20 years, say, who else kind of comes to mind when you think about some of the, the really good leaders that this industry has seen?
You think who comes to mind? I mentioned Roger Bendel before. He hasn't necessarily been in an institution or so, but so many people know him, and he's really been an influence and a great connector between businesses, clients, people, and networks. I'm thinking of some of the early pioneers in the industry, and this is especially when I was in Brisbane. Yeah, Cam McConnell comes to mind. Some people who really put, Australia on the map. Russell Welch. I'm sure there are more.
It's a hard one to be put on the spot with. So, Ingeborg, you have this fascinating story where, born Dutch, but been everywhere. Settled in Australia, dragged your family here from the other side of the world. This is beautiful. I love it. Maybe we should have you, Australia should have you on commission, for bringing good people to the country. What about your family? Have you been able to travel there? Because it's obviously a significant part of your story nonetheless.
Yes. It took a while. So I've got 2 kids, teenagers, and it took until they were, 10 and 12 or so that we took them to the Netherlands for the first time. And we planned to be there about a month and a week in Paris, but mostly in the Netherlands to visit all cousins, aunts, uncles, and all of that, and to see, really where their one half of the side of their family, of their roots, are from. And they were so impressed and surprised with having a large family, like coming from a large family, to the extent that my daughter, who's doing her final exams at the moment, thought, after my high school, I want to go and do a gap year, go to the Netherlands, look after all these cousins, grandkids, and so, and be an au pair there. So they were really happy knowing that. Well, they knew, but they experienced, the warmth of having more family than just the nuclear unit that we've got here.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's really, really good. And my husband, who's Brazilian, and when they were small, he was speaking Portuguese to them. I speak as much as I can. The family language is English, but I try to speak Dutch to the kids. And then they're like, oh, so this is where that fits in. And, this is not just something that mom does. There's a whole country where you eat, chocolate sprinkles on bread, and you eat all this different, you've got cheese shops, and why do you like tulips and things like that? So quite iconic.
That must have been an amazing moment, because it's like, you've had kids and obviously they've got these kernels planted through their upbringing, kind of knowing that it's out there, but then to sort of suddenly be there. Did you see that in them? Like, see some sort of change or moments where they were just kind of like, oh, heck, that's where that expression comes from, or
yes,
that's where this family reference comes from. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. And aunts and uncles, so my mother's brothers and sisters, talking about my mother who had just passed away 3 weeks before that trip. And so that was just really special for them as well. It's like, oh yeah, Oma had, sisters and a brother, and and this is where that all fits in. And they're talking about her when she was young, and yes, we know the same person. And that was really special.
It's a really beautiful closing of the circle, isn't it? And maybe that's the perfect place for us to wrap up on. Ingeborg, it's been such a pleasure to sit down and have a good yarn with you on Global Horizons. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob.
If you've enjoyed this episode of the Global Horizons podcast, consider subscribing to our newsletter. Search for Global Horizons podcast and then just pop in your email address, and that way you will never miss out on all the critical international education news that you need to stay up to date with. This episode has been produced on Garigal land in Sydney. Our video and audio editor is Len Zamora, and I'm your host, Rob Malicki. Have an awesome day. See you in the next episode.